Today for our daily cancellation, we turn to a sadly familiar story, one that has played out in almost identical fashion countless times on college campuses across the country. This time it's the College of New Jersey. Daily Wire reports on the story of a male college student who was investigated by the school for sexual assault 3 years after a sexual encounter that he says was entirely consensual. Reading now, it says, the male student, whom the Daily Wire will call John Doe, was a freshman at TCNJ in the fall of 2017. Throughout the school year, a female student, referred to in court documents as Jane Roe, regularly came over to John's dorm to spend time with his roommate, her ex-boyfriend with whom she was still friends. According to the lawsuit John filed after TCNJ punished him, he didn't interact with Jane outside of her visits to his dorm room. On September 30th, 2017, not long into his freshman year, John, Jane, and John's roommate were all hanging out together in John's dorm room. At some point, John's roommate left for the night, and John and Jane remained alone together. The two continued talking into the night, which John says turned into consensual kissing that lasted for a few minutes. John asked Jane to perform oral sex on him, and she agreed. After Jane voluntarily and willingly engaged in oral sex with John, the two fell asleep in John's bed, according to the lawsuit. The next morning, John asked Jane if she wanted to have sex. College teaches students that they must ask first to engage in any kind of sexual activity. Jane agreed, and the two engaged in what John described as consensual sexual intercourse. Afterward, Jane left John's dorm room. And from there, we're told that John and Jane maintained a friendly relationship as acquaintances. They made small talk when they saw each other on campus. They even apparently worked on a calculus assignment together. I have no idea how you work on a calculus. How do you do calculus with someone? I don't know. I don't know how to do calculus at all, so it's a mystery to me. But in any case, everything seemed fine. Everything seemed normal, according to John, until a month later when Jane started dating a different guy at the school. And this is when Jane first started telling the story of the alleged sexual assault that she supposedly suffered at the hands of John. It's nearly another year that passes. And then finally, after another year, Jane reports this alleged crime to the school's Title IX department. John himself was never told, apparently, about the complaint, and he was never questioned. He was never given a chance to tell his side of the story. He didn't even know about it. And then a few weeks after opening the case, Jane told the Title IX department that she wanted to close it. That's back to the Daily Wire report. But 3 years later, now almost 4 years since the encounter, Jane asked the Title IX office to reopen her case. On May 4th, 2021, Jane filed a formal complaint against John, which required the school to notify him of the allegations. The complaint alleged that John sexually assaulted Jane and made sexually harassing comments to her during the calculus class in the second semester of their freshman year. John was informed that an alternative resolution agreement, ARA, was being sought without telling him the implications of such an agreement. John obtained legal counsel and was sent the ARA, which required him to perform 90 hours of community service and take online classes. John declined to accept the ARA, saying that he felt it was an unreasonable punishment for something he didn't do, according to the lawsuit. Since John didn't accept the ARA, Jane told the Title IX office that she wanted to pursue the formal resolution process, which required a hearing. At this point, however, John had already graduated from TCNJ and left campus, yet the school pursued the process anyway. So now the case was fully in the hands of the school's kangaroo court, where all of the normal constitutional rights and protections, like due process, which are also going out the window everywhere else too, but all of that doesn't apply. More from the report, it says, John's legal counsel at the time, or at least they act as though it doesn't apply, I should say. John's legal counsel at the time advised him not to speak during the grievance process because anything he said could be used against him if Jane decided to file criminal charges. Even though TCNJ's policies say the burden of proof is on the school and not the accused, the school reportedly only pursued evidence that pointed to John's guilt. The school spoke to Jane's boyfriend and her friend, who gave inconsistent statements. The school also allowed what John describes as prejudicial hearsay statements to be presented to the administrators overseeing the hearing. And while the school allowed Jane to submit hearsay statements regarding her mental state, John was not allowed to rebut her statements or present evidence of his own mental state. John's counsel at the time also advised him not to attend the hearing on November 5th, 2021. He was informed that he had been found responsible, would be suspended for 2 years, even though he didn't go to school anymore, and a note would appear on his school transcript saying that he was found responsible for sexual assault. So we're told that John obtained new counsel and tried to get a new hearing, but he was denied. And finally, John filed a lawsuit against the school. As it stands right now, the school tried to get the lawsuit dismissed, but that motion was itself dismissed or was denied. It's not certain where this goes from here, but at least the case is in, a real court where a guy in John's situation is still has a huge built-in disadvantage. It's just a slightly less huge built-in disadvantage. You've heard me talk about how important it is to have a VPN to protect your online privacy, but choosing a VPN that you trust is equally as important. I like to do research on my sponsors. I only recommend brands that I believe in and that I will use myself. So to actually stop people from monitoring your online activity, you need to do what I do and use ExpressVPN. Think about all the times you've used Wi-Fi at a college, at a coffee shop, a hotel, even at a friend's house. Without ExpressVPN, every site you visit can be logged by the admin of that network. And even if you're using incognito mode, it's not really incognito because the same thing applies even there. ExpressVPN is the way to get around it. ExpressVPN is an app that encrypts all of your network data and reroutes it through a network of secure servers that you're private, to keep your private online activity private. ExpressVPN works on all devices. It's super easy to use. The app has one button. You tap the button, you're connected, and it's as simple as that. Your browsing activity is secure. Stop letting strangers invade your online privacy. Protect yourself at expressvpn.com/MattWalshShow. Use my link at expressvpn.com/MattWalshShow to get 3 extra months free. That's expressvpn.com/MattWalshShow. Now, here's the point about all this. 2 points, actually. First, we don't know what really happened between the people that we're calling John and Jane. We do know that Jane acted every step of the way like someone who was not actually assaulted. She waited a month to tell anybody about the alleged incident, a year to file a complaint, then she dropped it, then she reopened it 3 years later. It doesn't seem likely that a real victim would handle it this way. And regardless, 3 years is it's far too late to prove anything about an encounter that occurred in a dorm room between two people with no witnesses. I mean, no matter what actually happened, how could either of them possibly prove anything one way or another 3 years after the fact? Of course, in a legitimate legal setting, only the accuser has to prove something. So it's not what can either of them prove. There's only one person has to prove anything. That's the way it works. One of the most fundamental principles of our legal system is that the accused, no matter the crime, doesn't have to prove his innocence. But these Title IX university tribunals, they don't recognize these principles and they don't respect these basic human rights. A student, even a former student in this case, is presumed guilty of sexual assault the moment he's accused of it. And if he cannot come up with overwhelming evidence that he didn't do what he's accused of doing 3 years ago in private, in a room with the door shut and nobody else present, if he can't prove that, which I don't know how you possibly could, then he'll be branded a rapist. So the whole thing is, the whole process that these universities go through is a total farce. It's exactly why schools should not be in a position of adjudicating these cases in the first place. If a crime was allegedly committed, it should be handled by the criminal court system. Okay, if a student is actually sexually assaulted, which obviously does happen, then she's a victim of a crime, not merely a Title IX infringement, and she should go to the police, not the university Title IX department. Second, if John was falsely accused, then if he's falsely accused, then he's the real victim. And so I don't mean to victim blame when I say this, but it needs to be said. This is yet another reason why casual sex is a very bad idea. Okay? According to his version of events, which to me seems the more credible version, he had oral sex and then intercourse with a girl who could barely be described as an acquaintance. And she regretted, according to his account, we can assume she regretted the consensual encounter later and used it against him to try and ruin his life. There's not much he can do now to fully clear his name, especially when he's in the hands of the university kangaroo courts. But the next potential false accusation victim can do much to keep his life and reputation intact by not having casual sex with strangers. Now, that's not a 100% foolproof guarantee. You could still be accused of something, even if you were never in the same room as somebody. Anyone could accuse anyone of anything. But you certainly are putting yourself in a much stronger position. It turns out there's a reason why those prudish social conservatives have always recommended that sex be saved for the bonds of marriage. And this is one of those reasons. Sex is obviously the most intimate and personal physical interaction that you can have with another human being. If you engage in this act with someone you don't know, someone you have no tie to, no commitment to, someone you have made no promise or vows to, you have put yourself in an incredibly vulnerable situation in many ways. This is true for the man and the woman equally. A woman who casually engages in the reproductive act with some random dude could find that the act had exactly the reproductive result that it is designed to have, And now she's in the position of carrying a child whose father she barely knows. A man, for his part, could easily find himself in the position that John is in. If the woman decides that she regrets the encounter, and if she has no integrity, then she could make a false claim against him. But of course, the man has no idea whether she's this sort of woman, whether she has integrity or not, because he doesn't know her, and yet had sex with her anyway. Even if there are no false accusations and no pregnancies and no other consequences of that sort, still, both people involved will be left with the emotional and spiritual damage of having given themselves physically to a stranger. They allowed themselves to be used as an object. And this, I believe, is where many of the false accusations come from. In cases of false accusations, in many cases, I think, the woman wakes up the next morning, feels used, and she was used, except that it was consensual and it was mutual. She used the man as much as he used her. That's what all casual sex is. That's what hookup culture is. They were both dehumanized and they were both diminished by the encounter, but they participated in it if it was consensual. They weren't assaulted. They aren't victims, but they were harmed, both of them, in ways that may or may not, they may or may not come to understand. It turns out that you can engage in something consensually and it can still harm you. It could still be bad. So this can all be avoided by simply putting the horse in front of the cart instead of the other way around. Okay? Sex is meant to be an expression of love between a man and a woman who actually love each other and are devoted and committed to each other. So take care of the devotion and commitment first, and then you get to the sex. And then you don't have to worry about this stuff anymore. And that is why, in the end, after all this, it is hookup culture that we must once again cancel.